The longer LK5 Pro is a budget printer that comes with a massive print bed, and it's going to be perfect for those who are looking to print off large props, anything relatively large, but wanting to keep things on a budget for their 3D printing. Now, Longer did kindly send me this over free of charge for review. No money's exchanged hands, and I'll give you my honest opinion in this. Now, the machine behind me is the Longer LK5 Pro, which supports a really nice, big, large print bed. So first up, it comes packaged really nicely. There's a lot of squishy material in there to keep everything nice and protected. Nothing was out of place, nothing was broken, it all arrived safe and sound. So first up, I got it all unboxed, and then I started going through the instructions. And my first big gripe with this machine is they advertise it's 90% assembled, which sounds great on the outside. And if you're a first-time user of a 3D printer, this would probably seem really appealing and potentially would sway your buying decision. Don't let it. Honestly, I don't know what they mean by 90% pre-assembled. Pre-assembled from raw materials? Maybe. But pre-assembled as in you just need to add a couple more screws onto it? Absolutely not. It took me about an hour to get set up, which is okay, but considering so many machines nowadays are coming pre-assembled, or 90% pre-assembled as a lot of other people advertise, and you just need to add a couple of screws, this was really disappointing. Throw in the fact that the instructions were just barely passable. If you set up a machine like this before, you'll be able to make your way through it and follow the instructions. But if this is your first time using a printer like this, those instructions are absolutely diabolical, need to be burned and start again. So I got through all of the setup process, and then you have to get it all leveled. Now, it is manual leveling, there's no auto bed leveling on this machine, which is a bit of a shame, but it actually wasn't too hard. It took me about 10 minutes to get it fully leveled, and then I've not had to level it again since when I've been doing all my prints, which is a big bonus. Honestly, at this point, I was a bit burnt out by this machine just because it was very fiddly to get set up. But once I got that test print off, I was kind of surprised because I expected it just not to work because of the hassle I'd had so far. But it worked and came off perfectly. So I did this little calibration cube, everything came off nicely, and then I moved on to some other things. And I figured I'd start it off with one of these little kind of articulating prints because they can often be a little bit tricky. If the build plate isn't fully level, if it doesn't adhere very well, then you're just gonna have loads of issues. But it printed off perfectly. So I got this little snowman and he wiggles about all nicely. I didn't have to use any supports or brims or anything like that. I just printed it straight onto the plate and it came off nicely. Once I'd done that, I tried a couple of other things. So I did this terrain base as well, just to see how well it fit for something that covered up a lot more of the surface area, and everything came out nicely. There was no sort of warping, no issues there. Nothing lifted off the build plate, and everything came out level, which is always a bonus. I then decided to move on to something a little bit more intricate. So I've got this like kind of, I don't know, artsy Christmas tree thing, and it's loads and loads and loads of fiddly little lines and everything. And I fully expected that this wouldn't print. I thought the potential would get like halfway up and then I would start to see failures and everything else. But apart from some stringing on there, because I used some older filament, it's come off really nicely. I think just a blast with a heat gun and that would clean that up very, very nicely. So really impressed with how well it handled that. And then another thing that I printed off was one of these smaller scale buildings for Legions Imperialis, just because there's a lot of smaller details and stuff like that on there. And again, this came out really nicely. So in terms of quality and actually printing, it's really, really good. It does a really good job, especially at this price point. So that's a big score for the Longer LK5 Pro. Another big positive that I'll say about this machine as well is it advertises that it does silent printing. It's not silent, obviously it's got mechanical parts and they're moving around and there's a fan on there as well, but it is really, really quiet. Now my opinion might be really skewed for this because I've been using the Bambu Lab P1S and that's a really loud machine, but this is a very, very quiet machine. And in comparison to my Neptune 3, which I used to use, that was a middling device, so you could hear it when it was running, but this thing does get pretty close to silence, so hats off to them there. Now in terms of build quality and everything like that, it's pretty good. It's what you'd expect from a device at this sort of budget. It's all relatively well made, put together. There's a lot of loose wires and cabling and everything else that's just hanging off the back of it, and that's to be expected when it comes to this price point. There's a few areas, for example, around where the memory card goes into, which are these like sharp folded metal bits that don't quite fit together as nicely as I'd like, but again, I can't particularly complain when it comes to this sort of budget device. It's also got these rods as well just to help it keep it all in place and keep it stable. And the build plate is pretty big. So it comes included with this glass build plate, which I've never used before. And I was surprised. And let me tell you, this thing holds your prints like mad. Obviously, I'm used to using just all of your normal textured bases, which you pop off, they're normally magnetic and you bend them and stuff like that. This glass holds those prints. You have to wait for it to cool down, then you have to scrape them off there. And that is a big bonus. Like I mentioned at the start, I printed off these articulating prints and they can normally be quite fiddly. If you don't dial in your settings right, And if there's anything where it just comes slightly loose, that's it, you're going to get an absolute failed print. But on this, it holds it and it really, really well and truly sticks. So that build plate does a very good job. I've got a couple of shots here as well where I compare like my Bamboo Lab build plate on top of it and also my Neptune 3 build plate. So that way, if you do have one of these devices and you just want something that's bigger, potentially, like I said, for props or armor or stuff like that, then it'll give you something to compare it to. Another thing to mention as well is it has this really, really nice big color touchscreen on the front of it as well. This touchscreen is responsive, it's bright enough to see at pretty much most angles, and the navigation's actually pretty easy to follow around. Sometimes with these kind of printers, you get these awful touchscreens that just are very unresponsive, they're hard to navigate, and even at the high price point of like my Bamboo Lab P1S, that doesn't come with this nice touchscreen. I wish I could swap them around. It's a really nice screen. Now, I keep talking about the fact that this would be great for printing off large pieces, and in theory it would be. The only issue I've got with it when it comes to something like that is it is really slow. For example, I sliced the Stormtrooper helmet and I could fit it at full scale, full size, so that way it would fit on my head on this machine, which is pretty good. Only problem is it said that it would take about 11 days to print it off, which, yeah, that's a bit crazy. Now, granted, you could cut it up into parts and put it on there instead, and it is nice to have that extra area, and you could probably dial in the speed settings and stuff like that a little bit more than I have. But all in all, it is just worthwhile bearing in mind that although it does have a big build plate, it is still going to take a long time to get things printed off. So those are just some of my impressions about this machine and just some of the things to consider. All in all, it's a pretty good device at this price point. Although I'm really grateful that Longer sent this device over to me, it's also a bit odd because it is an older device, so therefore there's a lot of newer machines out there on the market. And it really depends what you're in the market for. If you can get this at the sale price, which it normally is on there for, then it's not too bad of a deal. However, it might be worthwhile considering some other options as well. So it depends what you want. If you've already got a printer and you just want something that's going to be able to print off some really big things and it's going to be a backup device, it's actually not a bad option. If you're looking just to have something to occasionally print some really big prints off, then again, a really good option for it. However, if you can stretch your budget a little bit more and you're not too worried about having a smaller build plate, there are better options out there that for a little bit more money can get you a lot more benefits. Also as well, if you can stretch your budget just a little bit more as well, you've got things like the LK5 Neptune series, which will offer the big build plate, and also they'll offer lots of benefits on there as well. It's a bit of a niche device in my opinion, and probably for a niche audience, but all in all, it does a really good job. I've got some great prints from it. And if you are looking for something that is a budget device that also has that big build plate, then it's probably worthwhile checking out. So thanks so much to Longer for sending this over to me. I have enjoyed playing with it. The setup process, honestly, that drove me crazy. It was such a fiddly little thing to go through, especially when it was advertised as 90% done, and it just, in my opinion, isn't. But all in all, once you get past that setup process and you get it all leveled, it's a good, reliable machine. Like I mentioned, I haven't had to re-level that build plate, and it's given me no failures. So all in all, pretty good experience. So let me know in the comments below, do you have this device? Are you thinking about getting this device? I'd be really interested in hearing your opinions. Like I mentioned, there are alternatives out there, and if you can stretch your budget just a little bit more, they're probably worthwhile having a look at, but it depends what you're in the market for. So thanks so much for watching this video. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.